Hi, my name is Meredith. I'm a writer and also now a freelance developmental editor. So if you have a book that you want me to read, you can check out the link below to my Fiverr. If you go on to enjoy this video, give it a like and also subscribe to see more writing content from me. Today's topic is creativity. You've probably heard the phrase creativity is a muscle, but what does that actually mean? How do we actually harness that muscle and become better at the craft of writing specifically? Since I'm a writer, that is what this video is going to focus on, creativity towards the goal of creating a story. So I'm actually going to start off with my own story about creativity because I think it illustrates the entire point of this video and the actionable steps that I'm going to get to a little bit later and the techniques that I used to become a much more creative person than I was a few years ago. So story time. When I was younger, I was intensely creative. As soon as I could write, I was journaling, and soon after I was coming up with stories, and by the age of like 12, I was pretty convinced I wanted to be a novelist. By the time I was 16, I had like 10 plus full-length story ideas. I hadn't written any of them because I didn't have the discipline or the know-how to do it, but I had ideas. For the next 8 years, I didn't come up with a single story idea. Okay, so I ended up losing this ability to create this way. So what happened? Well, frankly, I grew up, right? Then I went to college, and these academic demands were really heavy on me. And then I graduated and I got a steady job, and I all of a sudden had time to be creative again. And I was still very passionate about it and still wanted to be a creative person, but no longer felt like I was creative anymore. So, about 2 years ago, I started writing anyway. So, I took a seed of a story idea that I had when I was a lot younger, and I basically worked on it. The way that I conceptualize how I created this story in my head is that I had a hammer and a hunk of iron, and I just kind of hammered at it. It was brute force, and it was cobbling ideas together until they worked. That is a really painful way to go about writing a story, but I did it anyway because I hoped that the ideas would come. So, for the past 2 years, I have dedicated myself to the practice of being creative. I was working on the skills that would allow creativity to flow eventually. Flash forward to present day. In the past 3 months, I have had inspiration for about 10 books that I want to write in the future. And then also recently for books 2 and 3 of the book that I'm writing right now, where I originally thought it would be a standalone, but now all of a sudden I know the rest of the story. So I turned the faucet on in my brain because I worked at this thing for a long time and I didn't give up on it, even when my brain felt creatively dry. So that's my story of creativity. When you feel like you've lost your ability to be creative, what's happening, and also what can you do to turn the faucet back on? For me, part of the problem was I was comparing my adult brain to my child brain. But my brain right now at 24 is much different than it was when I was probably at my peak of coming up with story ideas, which was when I was like 13. It was different in a few ways. Number one was just brain chemistry. Kids' brains are wired to learn, to create connections, and to play, which is something that adult brains are not as wired to do. So, number one, brain chemistry. Number two, kids also have a harder time reality testing, which means that they're more open to connections adults wouldn't make because adults already know, oh, that's not a viable option. I don't even have to consider it. Kids don't know that because they haven't been around long enough. They're making connections that adults have already closed off. Number three is focus. Kids are focused on playing and learning, where adults are focused more on survival, on paying your bills, getting your laundry done, getting to work on time, doing well at your job. So kids are allowed to focus on creativity, where adults have to focus on things that are not going to be helpful for cultivating a creative mindset. And number four is time. Kids have a lot of time to play, and adults do not. When you're comparing your adult brain to your child brain and saying, I was so much more creative when I was younger, I wish I could get back to that, know that things are much different now for good reasons. And it's not realistic to get back to the mindset of how you were when you were 10 or 8 or coming up with your wild stories. However, there's a flip side of this, which is very good news for those of us wanting to work on our creativity. Adult brains have a lot of advantages when it comes to the creative space. Adults have the capacity for these two things that children do not: knowledge and expertise. If you harness these two things, you can come up with ideas that are actually original and are worth telling. Knowledge is how to write a good story. It's story structure, it's genre convention, it's what a character arc looks like. If you know these things as an adult, the ideas that you come up with for stories are going to be way better than they were when you were a kid and you had no idea about anything concerning story structure and you just wanted to go on an adventure. And as an adult, expertise is time spent focused practicing something. So expertise is getting good at writing, is storycraft. Now, adults are not going to be able to do them automatically. Adults have to put work into these things, But this is the positive side of the adult brain when it comes to creativity. Just to hammer this point home, think about the act of being creative. Creativity is connecting to previously unconnected things for a novel insight. The more knowledge you have, the more input you have, the more ideas that you collect, and the more you can process those ideas and think critically about those ideas, the more connections you're going to be able to make. Creativity doesn't necessarily just mean coming up with a bunch of random stuff. It means having some meaningful thing to say that hasn't been said quite that way before. So, how do we become better at finding those insights? All right, number one, stop comparing your adult brain to your child brain and recognize the advantages that you do have and then leverage those advantages, knowledge, and expertise. Number two, practice. That's the muscle part of this thing. I'm going to talk about the practical techniques that I use to do this a little bit later. But basically, like, you have to put the work in. You have to be willing to come to the table, even feeling like a fraud, even feeling like the faucet of creativity in your head has been rusted shut. You have to still come to the creative table. And number three, you have to carve out time. This is the thing that kids have in abundance, which gives them a huge advantage over adults. But you need focused time where your brain is not distracted by the necessities of life to actually be creative. Only making the time for this is going to actually allow you to become better at this. So make the time. And the fourth category here is arguably the most important, which is creating a landscape in your brain of something that you're passionate about that you're going to be thinking about all the time. So let me spell this out. So there's a mode in your brain called the default mode network. A good example of this is shower thoughts. This is where your brain is defaulting to the things that your mind is kind of always running in the background, and it's making connections that you aren't specifically focused on. If you have something in your life that you are so passionate about that you're always thinking about kind of in the back of your head, you're going to make connections to that thing based on everything that you're seeing in the world around you, all the experiences that you have. And so this is basically creating a landscape where you're always open to creative insight on a project that you're working on. And so for me, I am constantly thinking about stories, whether it's ones that I'm reading, ones that I'm editing, ones that I'm writing, ones that I'm thinking about writing far in the future. Like, I'm thinking about stories. When I'm washing the dishes, when I'm on my commute, when I'm doing the laundry, I'm thinking about my story in the back of my head. And this is facilitating a mental environment that allows you to have light bulb moments. Okay, so those are overall ways that we can move forward with the idea of being a creative adult. So now let's get into some practical techniques and all of these things I have done myself and continue to do today to continue being a creative person. Okay, number one is noticing and writing down. So basically, you can go around in your workday, in your boring chores, or whatever you're doing, your commute, on autopilot, which is what a lot of adults do to get through the daily things in life that are not as exciting. Or you can notice and you can write down any spark of an idea that you actually do have when you're going about your daily day. Anything that's a new idea that I want to store for later, I write down. It's not always necessarily a great idea or the next best idea, but the act of noticing things in my world, allowing it to make connections to other things that are important to me, and writing them down actually facilitates my focus, trains me to find those connections in the world. Number two is pretty much what I said before, but it bears repeating here, which is find yourself a project. Find yourself a long-term endeavor that forces you to, number one, become passionate about it. Number two, actually push through difficulties because there's a higher goal, something more important that you're pushing for than the emotional downfalls of this process, something that's going to challenge you to continually be creative and also long-term enough to allow you to have a daily practical habit. So you don't have to write every single day in order to be a writer or to be a creative. I don't write every single day, but I try to. That works for me. So it doesn't have to be every single day, but it should be regular. I say this advice for a lot of things because it helps with a lot of things, but basically consume all stories that you possibly can. Like, I'm talking the good ones, the great ones, the popular ones, but basically consuming other people's ideas and other people's creativity. Also, things that are different from what you're writing in genre, TV shows, movies, anime, whatever, video games. All of these things are going to be ideas in the idea bank in your brain that's going to help you create those novel connections that might just be your next big story idea. But basically, just read as much as you can and evaluate it. Don't passively read these things. Like, evaluate what you're reading, evaluate if it works, why it works, what you want to adopt, but also all of those ideas, character ideas, setting ideas, story ideas, plot ideas, twist ideas, all of that stuff. That's going to be in your idea bank, and that's what you want. You want a full idea bank. Okay, two more tips. This one I already recommended, but basically learn everything you can about the thing you're trying to be creative in. So for me, that was story structure, writing craft. That was genre convention, that was how to write a good scene. And so basically, when I came to the world of story writing with absolutely zero knowledge, I felt like I was walking a blank, empty landscape trying to bring things into being. And that's really difficult if you have no idea what you're doing. Like, creativity is going to be hard if you don't know what you're even trying to create, right? You know, you want it to be a book someday, but if you don't even know the structure, the scaffold of a book, you're going to have a hard time coming up with that good idea. And seriously, this is a key tip, like study story. It helps so much if you know what you're doing. And the last tip is something that I am so fond of. This is something that actually is a targeted approach to really helping you reach down into those more interesting ideas in your brain. And so this is called 10 ideas. Okay, so the concept of 10 ideas is basically you pick a topic. Let's do an example. Let's say 10 sci fi short story ideas. And you list 10 ideas. You have to go to 10. Even if you're out of ideas, you keep going until you hit 10 ideas. And if you have more, you can go past it. So the concept here is not that every single one of these is going to be a gem that is going to get you published. In fact, most of them are going to be crappy ideas, and that's okay. You're getting rid of the crappy ones at the top of your brain and you're digging down into the more original, creative, and interesting ideas. So if you're working on a specific problem, this is a really good way to go about solving it, is just to say, let me list out 10 different possible plot twists that could go in my story. And you list the first five, and you probably would have picked the first one if you had just been going for it. And then you keep thinking, and maybe by the 10th or the 20th one, you actually find a plot twist that's like really unique. And then that plot twist that you discovered while doing the exercise might be the one that is the most interesting thing that happens in your book. The other use of this technique of 10 ideas is as a daily practice in order to turn the faucet in your brain on. Because if you every single day are forcing yourself to come up with unique creative ideas, and a lot of them, that can jumpstart the process. Okay, those are all of my practical tips for becoming more creative. Basically, what I'm here to tell you is that if you feel like you're uncreative, if you're like, other people have story ideas and plot bunnies, and I feel like I am scraping the bottom of the barrel here, I just want to let you know that you can actually practice, you can actually get better, you can turn on the faucet. You don't just have to say, I wish I was creative like I was when I was a kid. We don't have to do that. We can actually just utilize the adult brain that we have and become creative. Okay, and with that, I think I'm gonna go work on my own book because I'm feeling very inspired creatively right now. I hope you are too. So go work on your creative project and good luck.